Today I'm going to talk about a Japanese term that I've found useful for understanding both my own life and the lives of those around me. And that term is goen. Goen refers to the circumstances that shape us and shape our lives that we may not necessarily have control over. So the people we encounter, the opportunities we have or may not have, the places we find ourselves living in. And you'll notice that goen is two syllables, go and en. And the go at the start is actually a honorific. And in this case, it implies humility. So humility towards these circumstances that shape us. So today I want to talk about some ways that my own life has been shaped by these circumstances. To start with, you may notice that some of my movements are a little bit awkward. And that's because I have a physical disability that affects my legs and my hands as well. It's called cerebral palsy. I was born at 6 months, so I was born 3 months premature. And when I was a year old, my parents moved to Australia. And that was where I was diagnosed. And my parents were really the first form of goen in my life, because I had no control over who I was born to. But they ensured that I had every opportunity I could to live the best life I could. So that meant a childhood of physical, occupational and speech therapy, and also several pretty major and painful operations on my legs. They were doing the right thing, but that also led to some mental health issues as well. I had severe anxiety and depression, which led to me being placed in a residential facility for children with emotional issues at the age of 7. And I spent 6 months there. Unfortunately, they didn't really fix my problems. It just taught me that showing the intensity of my emotions would keep me separated from the people that I loved. And at the age of 12, just as I was about to go into high school, all these issues came roaring back. And that was when another form of goen came about that shaped my life. My parents introduced me to a clinical psychologist. And this psychologist would go on to show me that my disability was actually a form of strength and adaptability. And she showed me that I had control over my own life and that I could make decisions that would allow me to live the kind of life I wanted to live. Also around this time, Japanese culture was becoming more popular overseas. And that influenced me when I went into high school to study Japanese as a second language. My time at high school wasn't always happy or stress-free, and it involved another operation as well, which really interrupted my studies. But after leaving high school, I eventually decided to go back to university and study Japanese at an advanced level, because my aim was to become a translator. My psychologist again came to my aid, helping me find a way to get into university. And after getting into university, I was also blessed by some really wonderful lecturers and professors who saw that I had a lot of passion and a bit of talent and ensured that I was able to go to Japan on exchange. But I also want to take a bit of a step back at this point as well, just to appreciate the fact that I was born in an era when disability was no longer necessarily being seen as a negative thing in society. It was something seen almost as a bit inspirational in some ways, which I've always fought back against in my own life, because of this very idea of goen, that I was born at the right time to the right people and given the right opportunities. But I was successful, thanks to all of this, in going to Japan for a year on exchange. And when I came back, I was also successful at passing the highest level of the Japanese language proficiency test, which required knowledge of 2,000 Japanese characters, and that was a real struggle for me due to my handwriting issues. But again, thanks to the technologies available at the time, and also some learning techniques that I came across, I was able to overcome this. After I graduated and spent a little bit more time in Australia doing things I didn't necessarily want to do, the Japanese consulate in Perth was really central to me finding work in Japan. I eventually went to Japan on the JET program, which is traditionally known as an English teaching program, but I went over as a coordinator for international relations. So that meant that I was working in a prefectural government office, doing translation and interpreting, but also I was working as a peer advisor, giving support to English teachers that were living throughout the prefecture. And this required me to pick up basic counselling skills like active listening and also understanding when to refer people to other services. So it was a really amazing opportunity for me, but I wasn't necessarily happy. The office environment wasn't great. I was undergoing a lot of culture shock. Some days I would go into work and I just wouldn't have any work to do. I'd just be sat at my desk. And it was at that time that I remembered some things my psychologist had told me about meditation, and also a little bit about what she taught me over the years about Buddhist philosophy as well. And I began to perform meditation. I began to do meditation daily, but it was a secular form of meditation. But these secular forms led me to other forms of meditation like loving kindness or metta meditation, which involves producing feelings of compassion within yourself, to those around you, and to society at large. And I found this really powerful considering some of the situations I found myself in. And this led to a wider understanding and interest in Buddhism. And it also realized I had a lot of capacity in myself that I wasn't aware of initially. Around this time, something else happened that really shaped my life. After about 6 months in the role, I came into work. It was my birthday, and the office was quiet, but more quiet than it normally was. I walked up to my desk and there was a card there from one of my best friends, who was also one of my co-workers. And it was kind of a funny card and it had been signed by a bunch of people. And as I'm reading it and sort of smiling to myself, my supervisor comes up to me and says, "Simon, I know it's your birthday, so I'm sorry to have to do this to you." And she handed me a newspaper clipping. And the article basically stated that a foreign English teacher had killed themselves the day prior. I'd never met this English teacher, I'd never spoken to them, but I knew they had a family that they'd brought over with them to Japan. They had children and a spouse. And the first question that came to my mind was, what could I have done? The second question was, why? I never got an answer to the second question. And eventually I came to the realization that there was very little I could have done, because we were entirely reliant on the English teachers coming to us for support if they needed it. We had no ability to go out and speak to them. But it also raised another question in my mind. If that person had come to me, what could I have done? And that stayed with me. Eventually I went on to other forms of work. I began working as a freelance translator, but my meditation practice continued. I also got married, and that marriage slowly devolved, and I found myself in a relationship where I was being physically, emotionally, and financially abused. I was never traumatized by this experience because I was never scared, but it was unpleasant. And thanks to the support of my friends and my family, and again, my psychologist who I was able to get into contact with, I came to the realization that staying in that relationship was not the right thing to do, because it wasn't helping her and it wasn't helping me either. And again, I think this comes back to Goen as well, because the reason that she was acting in the way she was acting was because a lot of the things that she'd gone through in her own life, especially as a child, and the lack of support that she'd had in getting through those things. So I don't hold any ill will or hatred towards her. I hold a lot of compassion, and I still care about her as a person, even though we're no longer in contact. Shortly after that, I met my next partner, and I liken her to, imagine you're walking along and you come across a plant and you notice that it's still alive, but it's starting to dry out. Its leaves are turning brown. And you pour some cool, clear, beautiful water on this plant. And you continue to do that over many days and many weeks and many months. And eventually the plant comes back to life. That was what she did for me, and it's something I'll always be grateful for. I realized just how downtrodden I'd become. Because of all this new space and positivity in my life, I also found that I had the ability to care for others even more than I could before. And I decided to apply to volunteer on a crisis line, which also helped me answer the question of what could I have done for that English teacher if they had come to me for help. And I also found that I had even more resilience within myself as well. I'd also started studying psychology at university because I'd found that translation was becoming more and more shaky as a profession as automated translation tools progressed. So really I was doing a number of things. I was working multiple jobs, I was with my partner, I was studying, and I was volunteering. It was a really great time in my life. I was truly happy. And it was around this time that I was asked to do a translation job about a school of Buddhism in Japan called Tendai. Tendai is relatively unknown outside of Japan. It's one of the oldest schools of Buddhism, and it's what's called a comprehensive school of Buddhism because it doesn't reject any of the teachings from any of the other schools. It's all encompassing, and it has a very quiet but dignified presence in Japan now. And as I began to learn about this school, I came to the realization that it was time that I took my Buddhism studies to the next level. And I actually ran across a monk on YouTube. And I watched several of his videos, and I learned that he was having a meetup at his temple in Himeji, and anyone could participate. So me and my partner went along, and as we walked into the temple, into the car park, a different monk saw us and waved and smiled and welcomed us in. When we got into the temple itself, it was a bit of an awkward experience. I was the only foreigner there. The average age in the room was probably about 60, and almost everyone was a woman, except for one other bloke. So these monks got up and did their Dharma talks, and the monk that had greeted me at the car park, he was quite interesting. I learned that he was a hairdresser, of all things. And when he finished his talk, he says, "Does anyone have any questions?" And when no one did, he looked at me and said, you look like you've got questions." So he put me on the spot, and I came up with something translation related. After that, we were shown to another hall where we were expected to do calligraphy, and because of my hand movements, I really didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. So we were sat at these long tables, and my partner was sat next to me. And as I'm diligently trying to do this calligraphy, all you can hear is this thudding sound as I shake the table because of my hand motions, and the sounds of my partner giggling next to me as everyone else is meditatively copying out this Dharma, sutra, I should say. And this same monk comes up again and sort of smiles, and he's trying to hold back laughter as well. And he says to me, "What a charming couple you guys are." We got talking to each other after the event, and he said, "Look, if you're ever interested in learning more about Tendai, just reach out to me." And I did, and we met up several times at his temple. Around this time, I had graduated from my initial psychology course, a postgraduate diploma, and it was time for me to go back to Australia to pursue further studies, psychology honours. Me and my partner were now engaged. She'd asked me to get married. And so we made the decision to both go back to Australia and start a life in Australia because she'd always wanted to learn more English. Before I left though, I'd come to the realization that I wanted to become a monk. So I met up with this teacher again, and I said to him basically, will you become, I said teacher, I should have said monk, but I said to him, will you become my teacher? And he said, of course. And so, although I had to leave that aside because I was going back to Australia, I went back with the idea that I would eventually be coming back to Japan to become a monk. So when I look back on my life, I'm grateful for so much. So much of it was outside of my control. And that's what makes me feel so uncomfortable about people saying that I'm inspirational or I've lived an amazing life, because so much of it was down to Goen. And this speech I actually gave at a workplace in Australia. I was asked to give this speech about my life. And I felt it was the only way, a suitable way to talk about my life. At the time, I thought that I was on top of the world. I'd gone back to Australia, we'd bought a brand new 4-wheel drive. I'd caught up with old friends, I'd made new friends, I was spending time with my parents for the first time in many years. And then 6 days later, something happened that changed my life forever. That made me realize that everything that I thought I'd based my life upon was actually deeply unstable. And suddenly I found myself in shock, traumatized, not sure how I was going to go on with my life. And even though I was a crisis support worker, I myself was in crisis. I lost everything at the age of 40. I was completely blindsided, shattered, and also seriously thinking of ending my own life. And that was when I saw my psychologist again, who reminded me that I had the ability now to recreate my own life in the way that I intended. So I hope that if you're interested, you'll subscribe, because what I plan to go over in this video, or series of videos, is what it looks like to take knowledge of Buddhism, knowledge of working as a crisis volunteer, knowledge of psychology, and try to rebuild a life. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.